So how did you end up going from like being trained to educate children in the public school system to then deciding you wanted to homeschool and have 10 children?
The thing that was the most frustrating was that there was so little time to actually teach the kids. 2 of our sons taught themselves to play the guitar. Our one daughter recently taught herself to play the flute. Our one son built a treehouse. I think if we can change the focus from trying to meet certain standards or pass certain tests, and that just makes all the difference.
I'm just so curious. When did you start to see the fruit?
We need to be living in his presence, and without him, we can do nothing. We cannot produce any kind of fruit.
Would you mind sharing about what your recommendations are for boys?
They're just bouncing off the walls. They're just so active. And then we had our daughter. It was the first time we had coloring in our house.
Yeah.
Our daughter would sit and just color. It was a shock for us.
Welcome to Sugar and Spice Mom Life, the podcast to help stay-at-home moms level up. Today I am chatting with Sheri from Our Life Homeschooling. Sheri is a mom of 10 children, all of whom she homeschools, and she actually had a journey from being a public school instructor to then deciding to homeschool her now 10 children. She also shares a lot about homeschooling boys specifically and some things that have helped her, how she differentiates between them and still enforces an academic standard. So if you want to hear more wonderful conversations like this, go ahead and hit subscribe so you can see the next one that pops up, and also so I can continue to get wonderful guests like Sheri on. The more reviews and likes and subscriptions we get, the more wonderful guests like her that I can have on the show. So without further ado, I'm so excited to share this wonderful conversation with Sheri with you all. Well, Sheri, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I know some of our listeners may already be familiar with you, but for those that don't know you, would you mind just kind of giving us an overview a little bit? If you were going to run into an old high school friend, how would you tell them about what's going on in your life these days?
Hi, my name is Sheri, and I'm a Christian, married to my high school sweetheart, Nelson. We've been married for 25 years, and together we have 10 children, ages 21 down to 3. And we've been homeschooling from the very beginning, but we started back in 2010 when it was much less popular. And it was very much a step of faith for both of us. We didn't come from a background. Neither of us had ever been homeschooled, but we really just felt like this was what the Lord had for us and stepped out in faith. And there were times when it was really challenging, but God has been good to us. And I'm just so thankful for all this time that we've had back with our kids, for being able to pass down our faith to them. There are just so many freedoms and opportunities that our kids have had because of being homeschooled. So I love to share about that on my YouTube channel. And I also have a blog where I just share free copy work and book lists and just all kinds of encouragement for homeschooling families.
And by the way, I love your YouTube channel. You were someone I found. I think now you have a really wide following. I think I've been following you for a while. But one of the things that I think makes your channel so unique is you do talk a lot about prioritization, which gets lost a lot in the homeschooling conversation, where everyone thinks, Charlotte Mason is equally important as teaching your kids about the gospel and equally important as this. I feel like you're really good at focusing on Christ first and then family relationships second, which is one of the reasons I love your work. I am curious though, because I know your background is being a public school teacher, and a lot of times people think of those fields as very contrary or opposed in some ways to the homeschooling sphere. So how did you end up going from being trained to educate children in the public school system to then deciding you wanted to homeschool and have 10 children? Because that just seems like there must be a story behind that.
Yeah, they are kind of opposite, especially the 10 children part.
Right.
And we didn't really decide on that one, but it just kind of slowly happened. And, we're so thankful for each of them.
Yeah.
But that one was kind of a surprise.
Aw.
But as far as switching, when I was in the public school system, there were things I loved about it. But I think the thing that was the most frustrating was that there was so little time to actually teach the kids. So little time was spent on that. So much of my time was taken up with administrative work, paperwork. Things were constantly changing with the newest educational trend and just trying to keep up with that. And I just felt that our kids could get a better education in a lot less time. And that was something that we found definitely to be true. It just doesn't take as much time as traditional school. Our kids learn more in the shorter day that we have than they would in a full day at public school. And I think that's been a really big advantage for them. That was kind of our reasoning. And I did have to unlearn a lot of my mentality. I had to really switch, and because I was very standards focused, as a public school teacher, your kids have to meet all the standards. How you are as a teacher or how they do on their tests is a reflection on how well you've taught them. So there's a huge pressure for them to do well on the tests. Whereas in homeschooling, them just actually learning is what's important. Teaching them according to their interest, according to their bent, having them love to keep learning even when they're not in school. That's more of the emphasis in homeschooling. And I just felt a huge freedom to be able to do that for our kids. And it was very, very exciting. I do think one thing that helped me, for the most part, I had to unlearn a lot of my mentality from being a public school teacher. But the one thing that was helpful was I think it gave me a confidence to know that what we were doing at home was actually so much more than they would have had. And that's something that I do wish that I could pass on to people that haven't seen that. I see young homeschool moms, and they just never think they're doing enough. They always question if they're doing enough. And I knew what was being accomplished in a day at school compared to what we were doing at home. And there just was no comparison. So that would probably be one thing that was in my favor, having had that experience.
I think that's so helpful because I do think, I grew up and I was homeschooled, and my mom did a wonderful job. I felt very prepared for college, but she was constantly worried, are we doing enough? Because there's what's happening at home, and then there's this arbitrary, far away public school, and nobody's quite sure what's happening in there. But every homeschool mom is worried, what if it's not the same, or what if it's not adequate? So I think that's actually really beautiful and special that you offer that perspective of having been in the classroom and then being able to compare, contrast, and say, no, I know my kids are getting a solid education because I've seen the alternative. So I think that's really a valuable perspective to offer. Also, I thought it was really significant what you were saying about teaching your kids to be lifelong learners. And that is something you said on your channel that is really helpful, I think, because in my mind, I was like, well, in school, they're doing 8 hours a day, right, of school. And most homeschoolers would say they don't do nearly as much. Would you say that? How much would you say you have your kids doing?
We typically do between 2 and 4 hours of school. So 2 would be for the kids that are in elementary ages, and 4 would be more for the middle and high school kids. It honestly, though, is also really hard to quantify because this has become such a lifestyle for us over time that if I were to count all the hours that we were doing something that could be considered school, it would be so much more than what's required. And so it's hard to, we get up, and even during the summer, we have just routines that are part of our life. When we tuck the kids in bed at night, we all gather again, we sing a hymn, we pray together, and just that hymn singing, what they have learned musically from following the notes and singing, hearing parts and learning the poetic beauty in the hymns, just that little thing, that takes 10 minutes, but they've learned so much from it over a childhood of that routine being a part of their life. And just so many other little things that are just part of our family lifestyle. They're not moments that I log on a sheet that I'm counting the hour, but it's part of what we're doing. And you mentioned about lifelong learners. One of my favorite authors is John Taylor Gatto, who wrote several books, but he was a former New York State Teacher of the Year. He said, we need less school, not more. And I have found that to be so true. Not that we shouldn't have structure, we shouldn't have routines, we shouldn't challenge our kids. I'm not saying that. Give them adequate book work and challenge, And then when they have free time, they'll still be learning even when you're not, putting something in front of them that they have to do. And I've just seen this with our kids in so many ways. They have interests. Two of our sons taught themselves to play the guitar, and that was after school hours for fun because they were done with their school and that was something they wanted to do. Our one daughter recently taught herself to play the flute. Our one son built a treehouse. Like they're interested in doing these things and they have the time to pursue them. I think if we can change the focus from trying to meet certain standards or pass certain tests and find ways to help our kids love to learn, I think that just makes all the difference.
I know you've used this quote before where it talks about education is the lighting of a flame, is it not the filling of a bucket or something like that?
Yes.
Like you're trying to ignite excitement so the student wants to learn. So that's been encouraging to me, just seeing like your kids, through your YouTube channel, choosing to read of their own volition in their free time, or choosing like that, the way you just said, they're using their free time. A lot of parents would just dream of that. My kid would want to learn how to play the flute in their free time. My kid would want to learn to play the guitar, learn to build something that complex in their free time. And I do think that part of education is kind of missed, where like I only have littles. But like, I do remember that as a child, like we had our formal school time, but then I would spend so much time reading. I would just check out like massive books from the library. And I do think maybe that's part of the reason it doesn't just carry over. You can't do a direct comparison, like hours in the classroom, homeschooling, hours in the classroom, public schooling, because it's like, well, yes, in homeschooling, the formal education's shorter, but then the child, if done well, the child like wants to educate themselves and learn. So I don't know. You've done such a good job of that.
Yeah.
So
that's and I think part of it too comes down to like who you are as a mom. Like if you're just sitting around scrolling on social media, watching shows, your kids are probably not going to be lifelong learners. But if you're picking up hobbies, if you're always learning, if you're interested in different things and dabbling in different things, then they're going to be the same way. They're going to be interested in those things. And I also think too, we have done our best. It is not easy, especially as you get teenagers, to really limit screens for our kids. And so, if there's nothing like that to distract them and the kids have free time, then they just will naturally pick up something. Mom, can I bake this? And then that turns into realizing she loves to bake and she wants to go sell these baked goods out in the neighborhood. Those types of things happen because of having free time that's not constantly distracted by.
That's good. And something that I've also wanted to ask you about, because I'm we are having kids at a similar rate as you did, but I only have 3 and they're 4 and under right now. They were 3 and under. But when I look at your family, I'm like, your kids are educated and beautiful. But I think there is this part of me that is very intimidated, because I do a little bit of phonics, right, with my 4-year-old, and we read, but the baby's like crawling around. And so in my mind, I'm like extrapolating out. I'm like, oh, if we have a big family like you guys, like how does this work? So I was curious, maybe that's not one of them, but I was curious if you could share, kind of looking back at your homeschooling journey, if there were any difficulties so far. To me, that like you've chosen, like you say, the road less traveled. And it's so beautiful, the result. I'm like, oh, I want that. But can you kind of open up a window into your past a little bit about like what have been some of the trials or difficulties you encountered choosing this road less traveled of homeschooling?
Yeah, I do think the early years are hands down the hardest. And they were for us because neither of us had been homeschooled, but also we were just open to however many children the Lord would give us. And so we were having children almost every other year. And when you're in the investment stage of something, you're not sitting back like relaxing and just looking at all the beautiful fruit, It's really, really hard. And those years were lonely in some ways. It was many days just me and the kids in the kitchen, again, just doing our normal things and not seeing fruit for a while. It was hard. Those early years were the hardest because everything was dependent on me. No one could read on their own. No one could right. They weren't running off and being interested in things because they weren't old enough to teach themselves or to read to learn. They were still just learning how to do all that. So those early years were definitely the hardest. You're putting in the most work. And I like to compare it to when you build a house. The first thing you do is dig the basement. And it seems like you're going backwards, not forwards. It doesn't seem like you're building a house at all. It's like, what? This is ugly. There's nothing pretty about this, and no one's admiring what you're doing in that stage at all. People are questioning you. But if you just be faithful and you know that the Lord's called you to do it, that was something we always felt really confident about. And you just keep being consistent with your kids, and slowly, as your oldest children become independent and your number of independent kids outnumbers your number of dependent kids, that's when you start to see the change and some of the fruit, and it slowly starts to get easier.
Okay. I'm trying to like believe you, because I'm like, oh my God. So when did that, I'm just so curious. When did you start to like see the fruit? Because I think every mom is like, they want to know that they will see fruit, right? But then there's this question of like, well, maybe the reason I'm not seeing fruit is because I'm doing a bad job. So like,
yeah,
I don't know. When did you start to see like, okay, I'm seeing the payoff, or like we're being consistent with discipline or investing in their education or choosing the screen-free way, all these things that we're told you should do. When did you kind of start to see that? Or did it ebb and flow?
Yeah, it did kind of ebb and flow. And I think some of the fruit was just in them becoming more independent. It's hard to say exactly when it happened, but it did definitely. The proportion was the more independent kids we had who were reading and writing on their own. When they outnumbered the little ones, it definitely switched over for us. And I know, because I did it myself, I questioned, am I trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? Like, maybe I'm not doing a good job. How do you know? And that is also, I think, where you have to, one thing I did was look ahead to moms that were ahead of me, and I was always picking their brains, asking for their advice. And, if you're on the wrong track, they're gonna tell you, they're gonna say. So, and for the most part, they were all encouraging me. And it just comes down to, we knew the Lord had called us to do this. We knew it was for our family, and we just had to be faithful when we didn't see the fruit.
Are you talking about how it is a walk of faith in the sense that you haven't seen the results? And it does remind me of Hebrews 11 that talks about faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And it goes through all these examples of different people that, like, Noah or Moses, like they believed they were called to do this thing, but they didn't see Noah's building a boat and people are likely making fun of him, mocking, And I'm sure you've probably experienced that as a homeschool mom, where people are like, well, you're wasting your life with your kids, and the public school could do just as good of a job. So it's cool to hear you saying, like, you didn't do it because you knew everything was going to work out perfectly, but you did it because you really sought the Lord and felt like that's what he was calling you to when you walked in faith.
Yeah.
How did you go about keeping it Christ-centered? Because I do think, a lot of homeschoolers can start out with that as the main goal, and then all these really good opportunities come in, all the sports, all the extracurriculars, and it is easy to like actually get through several weeks without even cracking open a Bible or, really thinking about like why you set about doing that. So how did you keep Christ-centeredness in the midst of like 10 other little lives that you're trying to invest in and all of that?
I do believe that intimacy with the Lord is the secret of your strength. And we had, I was pregnant every other year. And so either pregnancy was exhausting or we had an infant and that was exhausting. And there were some days where the babies were up before I was. I had been up through the night. They were up in the morning before I was. I could never seem to get enough sleep. And so it wasn't like, oh, just get up early and spend time in the Bible. That wasn't always the solution that would work for me. However, I always did get time to myself at some point in the day, somewhere along the way. The question I always asked myself is, when I get that first moment alone, where am I going for refreshment? And it should be to the Lord. It should be to what's going to actually refresh and refuel my soul. Jesus said, abide in me and my words abide in you. We need to be living in his presence, and without him, we can do nothing. We cannot produce any kind of fruit that lasts. So whenever I got my first moment of free time, and I didn't always do it perfectly, we're all human, but I tried to make sure that I spent time in God's word before I ran to social media, to any of my hobbies or interests, that I was in his word. And I think a second thing that has really been life-changing for our family was to begin reading a chapter of scripture after dinner every evening. And this is a habit we picked up when the kids were all very young. And it wasn't a legalistic thing for us. There are times we miss, we have things going on, but it's always something we come back to. And God's word is powerful. And it's one of those things that you do because you're like, oh, this will be good for our kids, read a chapter of scripture every night. And then you find out it's good for you and it's good for your marriage and it strengthens you as a couple. And it gives you, we still end up talking about things, or we'll read something and just see how it relates to the world around us, and just kind of totally pivots and changes the thoughts and the conversations that we're having in our family.
That's so beautiful. And it's encouraging you started it when they were little, and probably, because right now we're very much in like the laying the foundation phase. So I'm like, well, I'm reading this proverb at breakfast. I'm getting something out of it. And like, I don't know, the toddler's like smearing his smoothie on the table and the baby's massaging it in their hair. And you're just like, am I like, is this good? You just are like, is anyone listening? And then every once in a while they will glean something, but it's encouraging just to hear. Sounds like you just started out the way you wanted to continue. Like, okay, we want to do this as a family. We're going to do it when they're little. We may be getting the most payoff and they may not, but we're just going to keep doing it. And over time, you did see some fruit, which is encouraging for people in the
I do think
trenches.
there is something to just being consistent over a long period of time. At anything, really. What you spend your time doing, what you invest in, whatever it is, that's where you're going to see the most fruit.
I was listening to your live yesterday, and I know you were talking about curriculum and how you view it similarly with curriculum, where you stick with it, unless it's really bad. Like you research it a lot up front, and then you're like, okay, now we're sticking with it. I do think what you're saying is really helpful for people like me that tend to, if there's any hiccup, say, oh, we're doing, it must be the curriculum. Something it must be, instead of like, okay, this tension might be where you're lifting the last weight in a workout and you just need to push through it, instead of switching or dropping the curriculum or whatever's challenging. So did you ever have a time where you wanted to just give up, or you could actually consider giving up? Or, you seem like you're just very disciplined, very steady, like this is what we're doing no matter what. But did that ever like cross your mind where you just wanted to give up, or were you just like so persuaded that wasn't something you ever considered?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
In the early years, we have so much support now, so much support basically in everything we're involved in. In the early years, it wasn't like that. And I felt very much like a pioneer in most of the circles we were in, other than I had a few very close friends that God providentially gave us. I was so thankful for them. But yeah, there were times that I wanted to quit. It was very hard. The scene you just described with like the child like smearing yogurt in their hair and stuff, that just felt like my life for, I don't know, a good 10 years. So yeah, there were. And I am so thankful. My husband has been very supportive. And there were a couple times when he walked in the door from working, and I usually just had a look in my face and he could tell that I was just, there were a couple times where I just said, I don't know if I can do this. I think it's good, but it's really hard. And by that point, he had seen enough of what we'd been doing. And he also had the outside perspective. He wasn't there every day in just the regular grind. He saw the outside perspective of it. And so he was really great. He said, why don't you go out for a little bit? So I'd go out for the evening. And when I came back and I was refreshed, and when we were in a good moment and I, was kind of beyond that, maybe in the evening or something, he would just say to me, you can't quit. We cannot. This is really good. What you're doing is really good. And I know you're not seeing the same things that I'm seeing, but how can I help? He offered to help with whatever. He taught science for a little bit. Usually how he helped was doing laundry, cooking meals for me, and we were just a team. When he was there, he would do whatever he could to help me get caught up. And I think that's just something, if there's any dads out there, if you can encourage and support your wife and realize what she has sacrificed and what she's doing to teach your children, and step in to help and support her in any way you can, it will make a huge difference in your family.
Okay, so one of the other things that I absolutely have found so encouraging about your content as someone that has boys is that you have, is it 5 boys? Is that right? Mm-hmm. And I think how I found you was you did a video on homeschooling boys. And I would love to get like any tips or advice you have for that, because I do feel like there's sometimes conflicting views, like either boys and girls are the exact same, you know, kind of, we're told that a lot in certain aspects of our society where it's like, there's no differences, girls can do what boys can do it, vice versa, no differences whatsoever. And then there's like another extreme more in like the homeschooling, unschooling sphere where it's like, you know, let boys be boys. If they're not reading by 10, it's totally fine. Don't be, you know, don't even start formal education until they're really old. They only need 3 years to get their whole education. I'm like, well, I'm not like totally there either. So when I watched your content, I was like, I feel like this is very balanced. So would you mind just sharing with me and my listeners a little bit about like what your recommendations are for boys and girls, and specifically boys, and any differences you've observed and how to help with that?
Yeah. Well, boys, I think if you are a parent and you have a boy and a girl, it's just very obvious.
So
like they're so different without you having to say or do anything. They are just so different. And so that was never a question in my mind. We had 2 boys first, and it just seemed like a lot. Like they're just bouncing off the walls. They're just so active. And then we had our daughter, and she would it was the first time we had coloring in our house.
Yeah.
The boys no interest in coloring at all. And here our daughter would sit and just color. It was just kind of such a shock for us. And I do think it's just so much easier for us to teach our daughters because we are women and we're very similar in many ways. But boys are so physical and they need movement. So with our boys, I gave them a lot of frequent breaks, but yet balance that with when it's time to do work. I'm not going to make it easy on them. And sometimes for, I think particularly of one of our kids right now who's a boy, he has a hard time with all the noise and the distractions. So just knowing when do I need to have my kids close around me and when do I need to have this particular child maybe go into a bedroom or a room and just work quietly at a desk where there's nothing to distract him. And then when that lesson's over, keep lessons short for boys. It doesn't mean they're not doing a lot, but you're doing something for 15 to 20 minutes maybe, and then moving on to the next thing. When that lesson's done, give them a break and let them move on to the next. I read a lot to our kids, and so usually they start having an interest in wanting to learn to read because it's a mysterious thing that everybody else can do, that they can't unlock that knowledge and they want it. So, but when it comes to reading lessons, I remember with our oldest, he didn't want to do it because it was hard work. Mm-hmm. And so, I understand that you don't want to do this, but there are some things that you have to do. And 15 minutes a day of this reading lesson is not too much to require of you. So while we don't want to have the same expectations for our boys as far as, girls can naturally sit longer and they enjoy that. Boys need physical action, but we also can require them to do what's expected of them. And I think they do well with boundaries, knowing that the boundaries are always the same. This is what's expected. And if you can't do that, this consequence will always be the same as well. So, and as our boys got older, it is different like with young ones, but as our boys got older, it is so, so important to find as many male role models as you can, because teenage boys need to be with men. I know a lot of moms will send their son to work with their husband at least 1 or 2 days a week as they hit some of those older years, like 12, 10, even 10, 12, 14. That wasn't an option for us, but we tried to find as many coaches and men in our church. We had them, as soon as they were able to, we had them get a job somewhere where there was some good male influence, because that just makes the biggest difference. One of the best things that ever happened to our sons, our 2 oldest sons, the oldest is graduated, the second is graduating this year. They got a job with a contracting company, and they were going with a crew of men every day to a work site during the summer when they could work, 5 days a week. During the school year, they only did 1 or 2. It was the best thing, because they're with grown men all day, and we knew these men, they were a good influence. So that's something to be, to look into. But boys need to be around men. It doesn't mean that you can't homeschool them. Homeschooling doesn't just mean mom is teaching everything. It means that you have the freedom to decide who's teaching it, what's being taught, what worldview you want to teach it from. So that was one of the best things that we did for our boys.
Well, in this whole time we've been chatting, I just hear intentionality, more intentionality, more intentionality. Like the fact that you intentionally sought out older men for them to be around is really cool. And I think it's a helpful balance to, I do think it is easy to be extreme and say, well, they just need to be in school all day. Because I have seen that where homeschool moms get fed up and they're like, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Like, we're sending him to school. Or the alternative where it's like the son is accountable to the mom for every single thing. But I like what you're saying, the main point of homeschooling is giving them, a Christ-centered education, but also it is customizable. And so I love that you chose to do that, where you said, okay, we're going to involve them with this male role model in this way, or this teacher. I just think that's valuable. I don't know if it was you, I think it was, where you said your son would even get up and go play basketball with like a group of guys or something like that.
Yeah, people always wonder, are my kids going to miss out if they're homeschooled? But I feel like whatever they miss out on, there's something else that they get that replaces it that they wouldn't have had if they were in school. So yeah, every Friday, my husband, before work, he gets up early and goes and plays basketball with a group of men. And all of our boys go, down to our 10-year-old boy. And soon our 8-year-old boy is going to go. And he's playing, our 10-year-old is actually playing with the men. And our 18-year-old son is also going. So that's something they've had with their dad over all these years. And that's because they're available. And so, yeah, coaches, we looked for coaches. Our teenagers go to a drop-off co-op, and I always tried for our boys to have some male teachers. We have some wonderful men in our church who've invested in them. Just little things like even just going up to them in church and talking to them or taking them out for coffee. It's just your son's hearing from other godly Christian men. It is just so good for them.
I could talk to you for like another 2 hours. I have so many questions to ask, but I know we are limited on time. Why don't you share with our audience a little about how they can find that and find your homeschooling course and all that?
Okay, yeah. I'm on YouTube at Our Life Homeschooling, and I'm also on Instagram. I think it's r.life.homeschooling, but I do 1 video a week, and I just try to encourage other moms. I remember in the early years of our homeschooling, it did feel isolated many times. And so that's just given me a passion to really help moms that are at that stage, that are, behind me, just encourage them. And I have a new homeschooling course. It's called Beyond School, the Home Education Breakthrough. And it's all about how we have a family-first approach to homeschooling, and has a heavy life skills emphasis, especially in the older years. So yeah, that just opened up for enrollment yesterday, and it's been a lot of work, but I'm just so excited to share it with people.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and yeah, look forward to chatting in the future. But thanks, Sheri.
Thank you.